begin to bring in revenue, and the company, when demand came back, they could bring that back. And that's nimbleness. The second capability is scalability. The ability to handle an unanticipated increase or decrease of demand by multiple factors overnight. We used to serve X number of customers, now we serve 100X customers. And some of these were like Instacart and Amazon and UPS, and their need to sort of ramp up scale quickly. But it also applied to things like airlines and Hilton, the need to ramp down capabilities quickly. Hilton is a great story, and I'm sorry we're in a Marriott property talking about Hilton, but they used their employee recruitment tool. So the electronic system by which people applied for jobs within Hilton, and they reversed that. And they went and created contracts with Amazon and with UPS and with grocery stores. And what they did was enabled the Hilton employees to find jobs with these on-demand employers so that they could make sure they did right by their employees. And despite having laid off 50,000 employees in 2021, Hilton was still voted the third best place to work in America. And when they asked why, the employees said, because the company did right by us, because they could ramp down their supply, their capabilities in a humane way. And when we asked the chief human relations officer why they did that, he said, we learned from 2001 that demand will come back. And if we do right by these employees, when demand comes back, they're going to be more likely to come back and join us again, and we're going to be more capable. So using a digital platform to offload and reload employees as needed. The third is stability. The ability to be nimble and scalable while remaining operationally effective and efficient. Here I was able to interview the head of Google Cloud. And I think cloud is really the technological MVP of COVID, because it enabled us to do so many things quickly that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And I asked the head of Google Cloud, I said, were you nervous at all that you weren't going to be able to handle the demand? Because like the entire world went to Zoom, the entire world went to Google Meet, the entire world went to digital tools all at once. Were you worried you couldn't keep up with the demand? And he said, oh no, because here at Google, we maintain enough computing power on site to run the entire internet 9 times over. To deal with denial of service attacks and other things, we could handle that demand. It enabled stability despite massive shifts in the way people use technology. Last but not least is optionality. The ability to add on new capabilities quickly and easily. Here I look to the fast food company in the US called Portillo's. They're a Chicago-based legend. One of my co-authors is from Chicago, and he very much explained to me how wonderful Portillo's was. And what Portillo's was able to do was take their cloud provider, and when they had to shut down the restaurants, they were able to ramp up very quickly a delivery service because they had the digital capabilities to make that happen. So rather than relying on Uber Eats or Postmates or whatever the food delivery service here in Peru is, they were able to take it and say, we're going to keep this in-house. We're going to use our employees to do delivery. And in fact, their employees started making more money in this new environment than they were working the cash registers of the traditional Portillo's. So all these things taken together, how often have I mentioned AI and cloud? You know, a little bit. Because without these capabilities, without these technologies, these capabilities wouldn't have happened. But if you just had cloud or you just had AI, are you going to be thinking of these new business capabilities? And I would argue no. It's the affordances. It's the strategic moves that these technologies allow. That's what's important. And that's the knowledge, coming back to the growth mindset, that I think every leader can get. Every leader can understand at a high level what AI can and can't do. Right now, I think when you say AI, most people think it's magic. It's not. Just like when I was first getting my PhD, was in the midst of the dot-com boom, and everybody just waved their hand and said, because the internet. And the internet is magic. And they didn't understand why. They didn't understand what capabilities. And now we know what the internet can and can't do, and I think we're going to be in the same place with AI in a very short period of time. That leaders need to understand. They don't need to understand how to code it. They don't need to understand the math behind it, but they need to understand that AI is not magic and what strategic capabilities it enables. And I would argue everybody in this room and everybody you work with is capable of understanding that, at least at a high enough level to be able to sort of function in a digital world. Because when it comes down to it, oftentimes when I give this talk, we do a question and answer period, and people ask me, well, Professor Kane, how is this different than what we've seen before? How is what you're telling us something that is sort of magic and new for a digital world? And I say, you know, it's not. But oftentimes, in the face of the shiny new objects, people forget the basics of good leadership. In some ways, leadership isn't different in a digital age. It still requires your company to commit sufficient time, energy, and resources. And those that do, our data says they're twice as likely to be successful in their digital initiatives. The leaders need that vision and communicate that vision for where the organization is going. Those that do are 3 times more likely to be successful. Is that new? No. But people forget, or they don't have the vision and cannot clearly articulate it. Last but not least, do you provide your employees the opportunity to develop? Those that do are 3 times more likely to be successful. I interviewed the Chief Human Relations Officer of MetLife, and I said, where do you find good talent? And he said, don't get me wrong, I'm always on the lookout for new talent. But what my job is to make sure the employees that we have the skill set they need to succeed in the digital world. He said, that's my job. These aren't rocket science, these aren't different, but we forget. So in many ways, leadership in a digital world is not different. It just is lived out. The fundamental principles are lived out in slightly different ways. Now, we've talked a lot about leadership as being a top-down, the need, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as time allows. Top-down, we need the senior leaders to have this knowledge, but it's also about being bottom-up. It's also about empowering your mid-level managers to be digital leaders. I gave this talk at Caterpillar, the big industrial machinery company. And one of the proudest moments of my research was when sort of a mid-level manager pulled me aside and he said, you know what? I always thought of a digital leader as either the CEO or the CIO, the senior person in charge of digital. He said, now I realize that I can be a digital leader too in my sphere of influence. Because remember, early stage companies just mandate digital from the management, and that doesn't work well. It also needs to be bottom up. It also needs to enable the line level employees to do work differently. And here we see, throughout all of our research, we find that the C-suite employees are by and large more optimistic about the company's digital prospects than lower level employees. Because it's easy to have, not easy, the CEO can have this grand vision of where the company needs to go. But if that doesn't get translated down into action at lower levels, it's only going to be so successful. And making sure these mid-level leaders know the vision and have the resources to execute that vision, that's really where leadership gets different. Again, a surprising result in my research was we asked, to what extent is your organization increasingly organized around cross-functional project teams, and to what extent does management structure and practices interfere with our ability to engage in digital business successfully? And you see this moving in an X. That as cross-functional teaming goes up, management issues go down. And I presented this research at MIT, Center for Information Systems Research, and the executive director said that this was her favorite slide in the whole thing, because it shows that organization is part of the solution for digital transformation. But it's also important to know that these companies that use cross-functional teams also do it fundamentally differently. So we asked, to what extent do cross-functional team leaders in my organization have autonomy regarding how to accomplish team goals? For maturing companies, that's at almost 70%. For early stage companies, that's below 40%. We asked, does your organization effectively evaluate the performance of cross-functional teams as a unit, instead of only evaluating the performances of people on that team? Over 50% of maturing companies said we evaluate the performance of the team as a whole. Only 20% of early stage companies said they did that. Last but not least, our organization's senior leadership creates an environment in which cross-functional teams can succeed. And look at this gap here. 73% of maturing, 48% of developing, and 29% of early stage companies said they did this. This is what we mean by top-down and bottom-up leadership. The leaders need to cast the vision. The leaders need to set the direction. But then they need to enable the teams to have some autonomy and figure out how to lead their organization going forward. Because otherwise, I'm going back 2 slides, we end up here, where the senior leaders say, oh, we're going to be digital and we're going to be all these things, but you don't equip the people lower down to effectively execute on that vision. So what is it about cross-functional teams that's so important? This was actually, I was like, wow, I didn't think that cross-functional teams would be that big of a driver of digital transformation. The CIO of Harley-Davidson said that's just how digital is. It crosses functions, so you have to organize differently. The Chief Digital Officer of Freddie Mac said you have to organize differently to think differently. The Chief Marketing Officer of the financial services company John Hancock says it allows groups to work free from organizational bureaucracy. In many ways, organizations are built to get rid of innovation. And what digital cross-functional teams do is create the opportunity for that innovation to happen and creates pockets where it is encouraged and supported. Shamim Mohammed, CIO of CarMax, said teams enable greater opportunity for experimentation. We tasked Team A with Project 1, we tasked Team B with Project 2, we come back after 6 to 8 weeks, figure out what's working and what isn't, and try it all again. Stanley McChrystal, one of the leaders of the US Army, said cross-functional teams help deal with situations of true ambiguity. When you don't know what's going on, cross-functional teams allow people who need to communicate better and work more effectively. But experimentation is not enough. Again, one of the things I got wrong in my research was I thought that digitally maturing companies were just going to experiment more. And in fact, that's not the case. Everybody experiments. In the US, almost every company has some innovation lab in Silicon Valley or in New York or some fancy place that they can point to and say, look, we're doing digital innovation. And they pat themselves on the back and they say, look at how good we are doing. And yet there's an unwritten rule in many of these companies that innovation is fine as long as it doesn't affect the core business. Well, what good is experimentation if it's not going to ultimately change your core business, lead to something new? What differentiates early stage companies from maturing companies is not whether they experiment. If you look here in the beginning, 58% of early stage companies experiment. What makes it different, if you look at maturing, 52% run both small experiments and then use that to ramp up to drive change across the organization. They don't just stop with experiments. They use it to drive real change. And in fact, what we see is of the challenges that are most prominent is experimentation, getting people to take risks. That's the biggest challenge that most organizations face. Number two is about ambiguity and constant change, the things we've been talking about here. So this was an interesting slide. That result that came up is who is leading the organization's digital progress? You look at early stage companies, it starts with the IT office. The digital folks are, of course, the digital people should lead digital change. But again, in our world of the technology fallacy, it's not fundamentally about the technology. And you notice, as companies develop, the role of the CEO's office increases. The CEO becomes more, and this is what we talked about with Carlos in our coffee side chat session yesterday. The role of the CEO becomes more important in digital change because they need that vision. Another interesting side note, the only other one that increases as companies mature is right here at the bottom of maturing is product development. You have some companies, and Volvo is a great example here. When Volvo sought to digitally innovate, digitally transform, they didn't start with this grand plan. They said, what is it going to take for us to develop a connected car? And they worked on developing a product. And as they started developing the product that they needed to build, they started to reconfigure the organization around that new product and the capabilities of that. And it required the organization to change to make that happen. So it may be that the CEO casts a vision and says, this is the organization we need to become. And I think that is the mainstream and the most common way. But in some product companies, it may be just, let's figure out what type of product we need to build and how we need to build it, and then tell me what organization I need to sort of engineer to make that happen. So the CEO is critically important. And what we see is that as the CEO becomes more important, there are two factors that are associated with success. And they are the ambition of the company, the ambition of the CEO. How much change does the CEO actually want to make? Because I'm not going to stand up here and say that every company needs to become a Google or an Apple or an Airbnb or an Uber. Everybody doesn't have to do that. You don't need to have that high of an ambition to still be a digitally transformed company. So the first is the ambition. And the second is, what is the readiness of the organization to embrace change? What are the capabilities in-house that the organization has to be able to drive this change? A great example is going back to John Hancock. 150-year-old legacy company. that wanted to sort of try to get into a digital world. And they realized they did not have the employees. They didn't have the skill sets in-house to be able to do this. So what they did was they went and hired this former president of Digitas, a digital consultancy, to be their new chief marketing officer. She brought over a handful, about 12, what we call anchor hires, and those people were brought into the organization to help drive change in the entire company. These people didn't do it all. These people weren't the only digital employees in the company, but they needed these anchors to show the way. And so many companies, what they do to drive change is they look to somebody at a digital company or at a tech company with profit and loss responsibility, people who know the business side, and they bring them in to help guide that change. My colleague George Westerman says, from MIT, there's never been a better time to be a great CIO. There's never been a worse time to be an average one. I would also put that for human relations. There's never been a better time to be a great chief human relations officer. There's never been a worse time to be an average one. Because the great ones learn how to marry the strategy with the technology. The average one just know their functional area and can't drive the change that's necessary to lead the company into the future. So what we talk about in terms of ambition is we have a 4-scale model, and that starts with incremental digitalization and advanced digitalization. And that's basically doing business the same way, but now with digital. Level 2 and 3 are about introducing new products and new markets. And we argued which one was harder, and we came up with that new products is harder than new markets, but it may or may not be. And last but not least, the most difficult and the most ambitious is new business models. Are we doing business fundamentally differently? Okay, clicker, there we go. Well, I thought. I'm going to skip this and I might come back to it. So, the core of digital business is digitally maturing companies see digital as the fundamental core of their business. What we asked respondents is, what is the role of digital business in your company? Early stage companies said, we talk about digital, but we don't do a lot about it. We are mostly talk. In developing companies, we say digital supports some of our objectives, but it's not core. We do digital things, we have digital initiatives, but it's not fundamental to who we are. For maturing companies, 66% say digital is at the core of who we are. Increasingly, you have companies like Walmart and McDonald's and Goldman Sachs saying what we are is fundamentally a technology company. And I got to go visit Goldman Sachs in New York, and she said, we're really a technology company. And I said, okay, I raised my hand, I'll bite. Why is Goldman Sachs a digital company, a technology company? And she said, finance is becoming increasingly driven by technology, and as evidence, a third of our hires last year were all software engineers. Increasingly, traditional companies are viewing themselves as fundamentally a digital company. In the last 5 minutes we have left, I also want to talk about how digital disruption is a talent issue. So another leadership skill that doesn't change is the need to attract good talent. And what surprised me, I always thought technology was the purview of the young. And in fact, in our first year of research, we asked, how important is it for you to work for an organization that is digitally enabled or a digital leader? And sure, 85% of 20-year-olds said it's important for me. But also look at the other side of the scale. 76% of the people in their 50s says it's important for me to work for a digital leader. This whole age is a red herring. We all have this growth mindset and can adopt technology. And again, one of these surprising crosses is, does my organization, if you look at the purple line, does your organization need a fundamentally new or different talent base to compete in a digital world? The number never goes below 50%. All companies need better and more digital talent, and yet digital organizations are doing more to attract that talent. If we look at the way in which companies are developing the talent, early stage companies, they hire contractors and consultants. They don't know where to start, so they've got to hire people to help get the ball rolling, and that's okay. My favorite answer is the number 2 response of early stage companies is, we don't know where we're getting our talent from. We have no idea where to source this. But if you look at developing and maturing companies, their best bet is developing the employees they have. It's not about hiring more, it's not about hiring better, it's making sure the employees they have the skill sets they need to succeed and to thrive. And we asked ourselves the question, does this mean that employees are going to be willing to leave organizations if they don't get the digital, if they are not working for a digital leader? And in fact, we saw that people working for early stage companies were 30% of them were likely to leave within a year if they had the opportunity. Yet, so we said our early stage, again, are early stage companies doomed? The answer is no. What people don't want, people are not seeking to leave a sinking ship. What they want to make sure is that they have the skills necessary to stay marketable. So if you look here, if a company does provide opportunities for the employees to develop in a digital environment, they are sometimes 15 times less likely to want to leave in a year. People just want to be in an environment where they can continue to grow their skill set. And as leaders, it's important for us to make sure the employees have those opportunities. And it's not just about training. In fact, let's see if the next slide says this, and then we'll come back to this. It's not just about training. Only a quarter of them are training opportunities. More important is on-the-job learning. More important is supportive work environments. More important is where learning and developing and growing is valued and created opportunities for. But if we look back, we asked respondents, how often do you need to update your skill set to compete in a digital world? 90% overall said, I need to do it annually. 60% of those people said, I need to do it continually. Yet, how satisfied are you with how your company is helping you develop for a digital environment? That number is shockingly low. Only 50% in tech and IT, and down to 24% in auto manufacturing and 14% in consumer goods. So one of the best ways to attract and retain talent is to make sure that people can develop the talent they have. And I'm going to the closing slide. Yes, I'm blinking red that says get off the stage, but I want to close here because I think this slide is what it says, all of this last part. You look at the red line. Does your company lack sufficient talent today to support your organization's digital business strategy? As maturing companies grow and become more mature, that number goes down. Are you effectively utilizing the digital skills, knowledge, and expertise held by your employees? That goes up. Are you providing your employees with the resources and opportunities to thrive in a digital business? That goes up with maturity. So just like leadership, it's not necessarily that digital companies, digitally mature companies, have more or better employees. They're just making the employees they have better. The leaders are saying, I need to equip, I need to train, I need to enable these employees to be successful in a digital world. And the old joke is the CFO says, what if we train employees and they leave? And the CEO says, what if they don't and they stay? That as digital leaders, our job is to make sure the employees today have the skills they need for the future. And I'm trying to skip ahead to the very last slide, but my blinker has turned off. If you want to know more, I just skipped it. 2 books. Let's see if I can go back one. The Transformation Myth and the Technology Fallacy covers all of this stuff. If you want to look at my website, profkane.com, I have a lot of these materials that you can look through, et cetera, et cetera. I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to be with you here in Peru, and I look forward to talking to you all soon.